Gary, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
So you have a wonderful message about when to walk away from toxic people, but I just want to point out that sometimes the message is just so much more impactful depending on who the messenger is. And hearing this from a man of the, I guess, is this the right phrase? A man of the cloth, like such as yourself, makes it that much more important.
Yeah.
So I really want to thank
Yeah.
you for being the one to stand up and do this,
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I'll say it's wisdom that is hard won.
Mhm.
I was as naive as they come for so many decades. And I think because of my faith, misplaced guilt, I think a misunderstanding of priorities and principles, I let toxic people have too much sway over me at work and in other situations. It wasn't a message that was easy for me to receive. It's like God had to keep banging me over the head until I had, I need to open my eyes here. I'm making the same mistake over and over and over again.
So I want to stay on that point, but before we go on, I just want to make sure, for the listeners, I guess, everyone knows who we're talking with and
Sure.
and your background and your authority. So I understand that you're a regular pastor at the Second Baptist Church, Houston, which is, from Wikipedia, the fourth largest church in the U.S. Is that right?
The way they number them, I think there are like 15 fourth largest churches in America. And I'm a writer in residence. I'm not the senior pastor here. So I'm on the teaching team, but there's a senior pastor. And I think on any given weekend over the 6 campuses, we run about 25 to 30,000 people on a given weekend.
Wow. That's great practice for public speaking, I would imagine.
Well, it's Texas, right? Everything's bigger in Texas.
Cool. And you're also a best-selling author, an international speaker. And we're going to touch on marriage later, but you do have a series of sacred marriage seminars. Is that right?
Yes. Well, marriage books are kind of what I've been known for more than anything. So this is a little bit of a departure because it's talking about relationships, but instead about how to get closer, it's about the need to occasionally break apart, which is a new direction for me. I guess you could put it that way.
You also have books on parenting. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I've done a couple of sacred parenting and devotions for sacred parents. But Anthony, I'm not really the how-to guy as much as I'm the why guy. Like with parenting and marriage, the first marriage book was not how you have a better marriage as much as how God uses the difficulties and challenges of marriage to shape you, which would be applicable at work or relationship, any relationships, frankly. And so I do the same thing for parenting. It's not how do you get your child to behave. It's how does God use the practice of raising children to help you learn how to behave, to help you have greater humility and patience and understanding and a lot of good things. So it's don't let your marriage and parenting focus on how you change the other person. Mm-hmm. It's letting your marriage and parenting help you become a better person.
That's a really great message. You just made me think about a lot of different things in my life right there. So,
well, I've often thought about doing one for work, which I know is in sort of your wheelhouse, about how sometimes the most difficult work environments can be the ones that shape us and develop us and stretch us the most.
But let me roll it back to why it's such a unique message from a Christian voice.
Yes. Yes.
So here's I'm going to spit out sort of some of my gut reactions when I heard about you and this great book that you've written. The great book, When to Walk Away. We'll have links in the description and everything.
Sure.
I think turn the other cheek. Or,
yes.
It's my, to be patient and forgiving. These are some of the common concepts that you kind of connect with Christianity.
Yes.
Or with being a good Christian, I guess.
Yes.
So, yeah. So tell me about how this, what's the limit or
Yeah, well, I had read the same verses, Anthony, and just being a Christian, I always thought that it was proven by being able to be nice to the people that nobody else can stand. And I think sometimes people use that to take advantage of me. And what happened was this was in a work environment. I was in a situation where just beating my head up against the wall, trying to figure out how to interact with this person who also calls himself a Christian. And I was saying to a good friend of mine, he's been a marriage and family therapist for 35 years, just a wonderful man. I said, I don't know how to engage him. He's making me go crazy. I can't figure this out. I don't understand the motivation. And he shocked me when he said, Gary, my recommendation is that you not engage him. What are you talking about? Because to me, that always was a failure. If you can, and he said, I want you to go to the Gospel of Luke. It's one of the 4 books in the New Testament that have the stories and sayings of Jesus collected in there. He goes, count how many times Jesus walked away from someone after a conversation or let others walk away from him. Well, I was intrigued, and I read all 4 of what we call the Gospels, and was shocked to come up to over 40 citations where an interaction with Jesus resulted in him walking away from the other person walking away. Anthony, I always would have thought of that as a failure as it related to me. I don't believe Jesus could ever fail. So it completely opened my eyes to a new reality that I was only reading part of the scriptures. And then I came across other verses like Jesus saying in Matthew 7:6, don't give what is holy to dogs or throw pearls before swine, or they will turn and tear you to pieces. Now, we can't make that polite. We might want to try to make Jesus sound nice and polite, but in the first century, Jews didn't keep dogs as pets. He wasn't talking about Fifi or Lassie or Spot. I mean, Egyptians and Romans kept dogs as pets, but in a Jewish quarter, he's talking about smelly mongrels, just vicious beasts that just eat garbage. And then talking to Jews about not throwing pearls before swine. And again, pearls were so expensive in the first century. Jesus told another parable about a man selling all that he had to get one pearl. And so he's saying, don't give that to – and basically he's saying you have a precious message. In my view, just as a believer, it's the most important message anyone can hear about how God reconciles us back to himself in spite of our failings and failures. And he said, but if you give it to a person – he calls basically a spiritual dog or a spiritual pig, not only will they not appreciate it, they'll resent you and they'll turn and tear you to pieces. And throughout my life, I faced that venomous response where I thought I was acting with good motives. I wanted to reach a place of understanding and peace, and they despised me and hated me for it. And it brought a lot of grief. And I was just blind to that. I kind of just put that statement out as an outlier. Until other verses came through where Jesus told his disciples, look, you're going to go into a village, share the message. If they don't like it, he doesn't say stay there and let them keep beating you up and ridiculing. He goes, no, shake the dust off your feet, find a new place. And so I found a new freedom that not everybody's going to agree with the message that I carry, and that it's okay to walk away.
Not only is it okay to walk away, and by the way, those verses you pointed out were I think I had the same reaction you probably had. I was very shocked, right? Yeah. But you also had examples where Jesus not only turned the other cheek and walked away, but actively told people, "Okay, you can leave. if you're not here to receive my message, you can leave the room now."
Yeah,
that might be
yeah. In fact, it's stunning to me with my eyes open. I couldn't count how many times I've read the New Testament. I've been reading it throughout my life from the time I was 8 years old. I turned 58 soon. So it's 50 years, I guess, of reading the Bible. So how not nice Jesus was in many situations. He would call people to the truth. I think of the rich young ruler when and I don't think of him as a toxic person, but he's interacting with Jesus, and Jesus discerned his heart. And I don't know that he would say this to everybody, but he said it to him. He said, you know what? If you want to be perfect, because you said you do, sell everything you have and give to the poor. And it's funny, Anthony, because the Bible says he went away very sad because he was very rich. Just that sentence, he was very sad because he was very rich, isn't a sentence we think of today. But what struck me is Jesus didn't chase after him. Jesus didn't say, 100% is a bit extreme. Let's start at 50. We'll work up. We'll negotiate up from there. It was really a situation where Jesus instead turned to the disciples and said, let me explain to you why it's so difficult for the wealthy to enter the kingdom of God. They have this pull on their heart that they're going to have to wrestle with if they want to take on an entirely new kingdom for their highest value. So there are many instances where Jesus was not insecure. He was not fearful of rejection. It was, here's the truth, take it or leave it. And that was just lacking in my own life. I thought it would be a failure if I couldn't get others to agree that at least that I was a nice guy, or that we're just going to agree to disagree and everybody's going to be happy. The world doesn't work that way. And I know a lot of your listeners are probably saying, he is so naive. Man, I welcome to the adult world. But for me, and maybe because of my faith, I let that misguided guilt lead me to a lot of grief. And I finally realized no more. I don't have to do that.
Well, you do a really great job in the book, categorizing and using great stories, by the way, to illustrate each of these categories. We can go over some situations with coworkers or business. I want to make sure we hit on marriage and parenting and children if we have time.
Sure.
But these are all great. I mean, these are all things we all deal with in our own lives, and it's just really, really useful, I think, to understand that. So the way I kind of summarize what I got from your book was that toxic people, and we'll get into why, labeling versus name calling and all that, but they seem to use your own sense of duty against you. That's kind of
Yes.
what I came away with, to the logical extreme.
What I found, they're better at being toxic than we are at confronting their toxicity because they've probably been toxic for most of their adult life. We naturally want to think the best of people. We want to get along with each other. In a healthy situation, we want a peaceful environment so that we can get the work done. Yeah. We want a healthy marriage so that we can enjoy peace and quiet at home. Here's what was the revelation to me that blew me away when I finally realized, to a toxic person, a team working in an office, accomplishing a single aim is boring. Because they're all about control. Right. They want to sow division. They want to be ahead of people. And so they're often gossiping and they're lying and they're playing petty power wars and whatnot, because that's what makes them feel like they're alive. That's what makes them feel like they have a reason to get out of bed. And we're thinking, boy, if we have a team and we're accomplishing an aim and we're reaching our goals, we don't want distractions. Toxic people tend to live for the distractions. And that's where I would just urge bosses to recognize that being afraid to offend one toxic person is hurting the 12 or 20 coworkers that they are regularly distracting and assaulting and making their lives miserable. That we have to realize, when I read a lot of old books that are called the Christian classics, and one of the writers says, there aren't as many toxic people as we might think, but they have an inordinate impact. Just one or two of them can wreck an entire social structure. And so I don't think we should be too quick to label people toxic or try to find toxic people behind every cubicle. But I do think, especially as it's in your authority, if somebody has a chance to challenge someone, the kindness you're doing toward everyone else, even though the toxic person will hate you for it. I tell example, this is a different work environment, but I have a friend, Jonathan Bird, who plays on the PGA Tour. Cool. And he tells a story of playing with, we'll just call him Golfer X. I don't want to give out the professional golfer's name. But he's kind of known around the tour of, I can't use Jonathan's language on a podcast, but not Jonathan's a great guy. I don't mean it by that. But he just uses a common word that I'm not going to use. But he was a jerk. Let's say that. He was toxic. And he would berate the volunteers and the marshals and the other players and the fans. And Jonathan was just getting tired of it because he said, these volunteers, he said, they save us so much money as players. He goes, our purses would be cut in half if we had to pay these volunteers. But he's just being short this golf every time. And then finally they came up to one hole and it was a blind tee shot. And Golfer X got up and he's starting to swing. And so the marshal comes up and says, Mr. Golfer X, just so you know, the other players are still in the fairway. And he turns him. He goes, no blank, Sherlock. I mean, basically, and Jonathan goes, look, apologize to him. He said, why? He goes, for being a jerk. He didn't use the word jerk, but he got the point across. He goes, he's just trying to help. And I just laughed because, these are two guys. I said, Jonathan, what happened next? He says, well, he hit the next ball out of bounds. And I go, oh, man. He goes, yeah, we didn't talk much after that. But here's the thing. He shut up for the rest of the round. He hated Jonathan. He was angry at Jonathan, but he didn't berate any other field marshals or volunteers or fans. And so I thought Jonathan was acting like a strong Christian man at that point, basically saying, a marshal, except at Augusta, even a marshal is going to feel like they're under at the players. But Jonathan said, we're on an equal par. You're acting in a toxic way. Look, just cut it out. We don't need to do that. And so that's what I would say to bosses or colleagues when you're in the same level. It's a little more difficult if you're a subordinate trying to confront a toxic boss. That's a whole different situation.
That's great. I mean, from from a business owner's perspective, we talk a lot about the 80-20 rule. I mean, that's applied to many walks of life. But with clients, for example, it always tends to work out that 20% of your clients occupy 80% of your time. And whether it's because they're not because they have complicated cases that are worthwhile. Sometimes that's the case, but just that you're very demanding of your time. And sometimes you can just cut out that 20% and recoup a huge amount of your time and productivity. It's just something that I've thought about a lot for the past 5 to 10 years, and just seeing you write about it is great. So let's get into your wheelhouse. Let's get into marriage. A lot of the examples you demonstrate, you write about, it seems to tie into using a sense of marital duty or desire to preserve the marriage against the non-toxic spouse, like kind of holding that over their head. Am I getting that?
It is. And this was the hardest part for me to write about, because I've written a number of books on marriage that have done pretty well. So a lot of people have read that. And that's why I put on the marriage chapter, when I had toxic marriages, if this is the first chapter you're turning to, please go back and read the other ones, because it takes me some time to lay out the principles and, for me, the scriptures that would lead to the conclusions I did. But what opened my eyes, I moved from the protected Pacific Northwest 10 years ago to Houston, Texas, the fourth largest city in the nation, dealing with real life situations, that the very platform of marriage and intimacy that could be so healing and refreshing and filling our souls can be used to terrorize. Now, I think that's the minority, certainly a very small minority, but we can't be naive. We have to open up our eyes. And I realize that some people, just like I said, a peaceful office working toward one mission is boring to a toxic person. A healthful marriage where two people are encouraging each other and raising a family is boring to a toxic spouse. They've got to be intimidating their spouse, controlling their spouse, having conflict with their spouse just to feel alive. It's just a toxic bent in their character. I was seeing people all but destroyed. Their service to God was being eclipsed. Their sense of peace was shattered. Their sense of self-confidence was demolished because they were, toxic people are often great at gaslighting. That's a term where somebody makes you feel crazy for stating the obvious. Mm-hmm. Somebody's stolen an account at work or something. I didn't steal it. You've got the thing. And you feel like you're losing your mind. Like, how can they just bald-faced lie like that? And so we have to be careful in certain situations where a marriage is being used as a platform to destroy an individual. At that point, I think we have to look at what we do to preserve that person. And it's hard for me, Anthony, because I've spent my life helping marriages stay together. A book that I have, actually, it will sell. This sounds bragging. I don't mean to, but it'll reach 1 million copies this month. So it's Sacred Marriage. And the subtitle is, what if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? And the premise is that God can use even the difficulties of marriages and the challenges of marriage to help shape our souls, to make us better people, to help us understand God and grow closer to becoming like Christ. And so I believe in using the difficulty of marriage, not running from it. But there's a difference.
You make that important. Yeah, please go on. I was about to say.
There's a difference between a difficult marriage and a toxic marriage. And I do believe this message could be used of when to walk away, finding freedom from toxic people. I know it will be used in some cases for people to escape a difficult marriage. And it breaks my heart. It's what can you do as a writer? It's the same thing you face as a podcaster. You've got 20, 25 minutes for a show and you speak a truth and somebody takes a couple sentences and they have their own application. So we don't control it. But on the other hand, not speaking this truth, I think, has led to just souls being destroyed. When we're only concerned about keeping a marriage together rather than confronting evil, I think we really give evil a chance to flourish. And I think the same thing is true in an office. When you're more concerned about making everybody happy than confronting and removing evil, evil will flourish in that office.
So the one topic my wife made me promise that we would talk about was the prodigal son story applied to toxic children, because
yes,
we had a little bit of a difference between in our household how we interpret that story. So I would love for you to just get into that and
yes,
not settle an argument, but just have a shared conversation.
All right, don't tell me your side or her side, and I'll
Very
just
good.
go with it, and then you can tell me who's going to be happy tonight.
Cool.
First, I'm dealing with adult children, and I point out, which is obvious, people probably get, that the father of the prodigal son didn't grab the son's feet when he went away. He let him walk away.
Mm-hmm.
He ran toward him when the son was coming back. And the premise of the book is that the reason we walk away is to accomplish the mission that God has given us. And we shouldn't sacrifice our own mission to try to rescue even a toxic adult child. I tell the story of a woman who had a couple of daughters, and one was as toxic as they would get. And this woman has a great ministry. She leads Bible studies. She mentors women formally and informally. She has another daughter, and she was consistently canceling her ministry engagements, canceling lunches with friends, not being able to meet with people she was mentoring to try to rescue this toxic daughter. She finally woke up. It's been 5 years. This daughter is worse off today than when I started rescuing. It's not helping her. And the daughter was
work. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the street tomorrow. And she's like, I can't let my daughter be on the street tomorrow. And she finally realized how much she had not been able to do by rescuing her. And the fact that rescuing wasn't helping opened up her eyes to value her mission. You know what? What God has called me to is important. And I go into the book about the reason we walk away from toxic people is to walk toward reliable people. And there's several scriptures that talk about the need to invest in other people, to mentor people. And so she was doing the exact opposite. She was walking away from reliable people she could mentor to try to rescue a toxic person who in the end resented it, because toxic people can't be pleased. They're going to have a beef with you. If you give them attention, you're not giving them the right kind of attention, or you're not agreeing with them. Or if you give them money, you're not giving them enough money, or you put strings on it. It's impossible to control them. And so when we have a high view of our own mission before the Lord, we don't want to take attention from the healthy children. I've seen parents do this, Anthony, where they'll have 3 kids. In one case I use in the book, he had 2 daughters and a son. The daughters were wonderful. They're listening to him, and they were doing great things with their life. A son, he's gotten involved in drugs and other things. And he admitted, because it was his son, there might be a little sexism there. He wanted to be proud of his boy, until a counselor finally pointed out to him, you spend more time working with, focusing on, and talking to your son, who's never appreciated it, who's getting worse, than you do your 2 healthy daughters combined.
Oh, wow.
And it's the opposite of the biblical model. You're taking from them to give to him. And he said, look, you always welcome him back, but you can see the strategy isn't helping. And I think most parents would know, if they're dealing with a truly toxic child, if they're just honest, they're afraid of what would happen. But take a step back and realize, has it worked? And who are you ignoring to pour your good work into this other ones? Because I think
it's an economics principle. It's that there's an opportunity cost when you're spending that time over there.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Is this the wisest investment of your time? One of the analogies I use as a pastor is, I think this is one of Satan's cleverest traps against the church today. He knows he can't stop Christians from caring because God's Spirit makes us care. He pours his love into our hearts. We want to love people. We want to sacrifice and serve. It's what Jesus tells us to do. Satan knows he can't stop that, but here's what he can do. He can get us to keep us from pouring that water onto a fertile field that will result in a huge crop, and instead get us to pour it straight into the gutter of a toxic person. So we take all of that effort, energy, and concern that could produce a lot of good spiritual fruit, people that are challenging, who will also teach others later, and instead give it to someone who not only won't be changed, who not only won't receive it, but according to Jesus, they'll resent it and turn and try to tear us to pieces.
Wow. All right. So I want to wrap up with one question, putting you on the hot seat, if you don't mind. I just thought of it.
But first, I got to ask you a question.
Oh, for sure.
Did I agree with you or your wife on the parenting thing?
So I'm going to confess, I don't even remember what we disagreed on.
Okay. All right. Well, good. We don't have to go there then.
Okay. So I'm sure like any thought-provoking and thoughtful piece, I'm sure you're going to have detractors and critics for this particular book, which is, to me, a sign that you're doing something right, by the way. So what do you say to the folks who would argue that this is an overly utilitarian approach, meaning, how does Mill say it? What's good for the many, good for the most. I'm sure I'm butchering this, but do you understand what I'm trying to get at? I mean, you're sacrificing a few to save or help more, but I mean, is it worth it to sacrifice those few toxic people? Is that morally correct?
I would say guilty as charged. I'm willing to own that conclusion. When I looked at the New Testament through this light of Jesus walking away, I saw how mission-minded he was. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says, seek first the kingdom of God. He's not talking to professional religious people like me. He was talking to farmers and tradesmen and moms and dads and grandfathers, grandmothers. And he's basically saying your agenda should be letting God use you to build his kingdom. And so he said to his disciples, pray for more workers. There's not enough people who will not live for themselves, but instead will live for me. And he was, more than he was focusing on being nice to people, he was enlisting them in his kingdom work. I think too many people think of Christianity, I might be getting very religious now, but too many people think of Christianity as what you don't do. You don't look at this, you don't eat this, you don't drink that, you don't watch that, all of those things. Jesus defined Christianity as fruitfulness. He says in John 15:8, is by this that my Father's glorified, that you produce much fruit. He was all about mission. It's not what you don't do. It's really what you allow God to produce through you. And so he held up the mission. And here's the picture, analogy, metaphor that helps me hold this in tension. I think of Christian workers as battlefield surgeons performing triage. On D-Day, after the soldiers went up the beach, the surgeons would follow. And I read accounts of this where they would have to do what they call triage, and that is make a quick decision. Can this person be saved? If they thought, there's a 5% chance this person will be saved, but I'm going to spend 90 minutes on him, they had to make the tough choice. They would give him a shot of morphine, paint an M on his chest so he didn't get another shot because that would be fatal, and then go on and help others who could more likely be saved. And it seems cruel. Why would you leave this person? They understood that being kind meant I probably can't save him. And if I spend 90 minutes on a person who can't be saved, 10 people who could be saved will die. I could dress their wounds. I could help them. So I'm actually killing the 10 people who can be saved by trying to rescue the one who can't. And I believe that's the message Jesus gave to his disciples. Let the toxic people go and invest your time in the reliable people who will produce much fruit. So I'll accept that charge. I think it's a biblical charge.
I feel like pulling a string and playing devil's advocate, but I already have the counter argument to my own devil's advocate argument, so I'll just leave it where it is.
Okay.
And plus, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Fine. Sure.
I do highly recommend this book. I actually believe very strongly in what you're advocating here, and I love the spin that you've put on it. So, make sure you pick up a copy. Gary Thomas, When to Walk Away from Finding Freedom from Toxic People. Is there anything else we should you'd like to mention before we sign off here, Gary?
No, thank you. It was a delight to talk with you, and I appreciate you giving me this chance.
Thanks so much. Hang on tight while we sign off from the guests. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Talk to you next time. Bye.